Developer. I work for a company that develops large projects, something like what you might see on the landfill. But I'm also a member of the Green Advisory Board. I want to move forward, stand over here? Okay, great. So I'm also a member of the Green Advisory Board. The Green Advisory Board advises the Board of Selectmen in Acton. And we help the town work on issues, both the school committees and the town work on issues having to do with renewable energy, energy efficiency, and general overall sustainability. We are always looking for new members, so if anybody's interested, see me afterwards. So this program's sponsored, this is an educational program. I'll tell you more about it in a second. But I do want to say a couple things. We've sponsored this Green Advisory Board with the Green Acton community, and Jim Snyder-Grant will tell you a little bit more about Green Acton in a minute. We're also very thankful to our hosts, so Acton Village Works, which was also developed by New Habitat Partners. And so this is a great new facility. If you're from Acton, you've probably driven by for a couple of years wondering when it was going to open. Finally has. There is solar on the roof, and there's solar on the building behind us. So just general overview. Jim, you want to say a little bit about Green Acton?
Thanks, Dennis. Jim Snyder-Grant from Green Acton. We're an Acton environmental group, and we're co-sponsoring the event with the Green Advisory Board. If you want to know more about Green Acton, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. We'll send you monthly emails, invite you in to do all sorts of interesting things. But my main job here in the next 2 minutes is to set some context about why we're here trying to get solar electricity into our homes so that you are motivated to sit through the details that you're about to hear about. You're going to hear about the how, but I want to just give you some why, first of all. And thank you for being here, for being part of this important work of switching our homes over to renewable, clean power. So here's the big picture. Human civilization. How much bigger can you get? Each time we have found fossil fuels in the ground, like with coal or with crude oil or with natural gas, civilization has in many ways taken big steps forward. Populations increased, average lifespans have gone up, people have gotten healthier, but there's a big downside, as we're learning now. First of all, the supply doesn't meet the demand. It takes about 1 million years to go from a bunch of dead plants to a whole bunch of geological process to fossil fuels. And we're using them up in the time scale of decades, maybe centuries, but a lot faster than we're making new fossil fuels. The other issue is, of course, anytime you extract something out of the ground, you bring up a lot of other junk along with it, and we're finding that places are getting poisoned, people are getting killed. It's just not great to live around fossil fuel extraction facilities. The third point is, of course, that we are poisoning our air, our oceans. All those old dead plants, millions of carbon-based life forms, are being burned and their remnants are being put in the air. So we are thickening our carbon dioxide greenhouse blanket around the Earth. Temperatures are going up, CO2 concentrations are going up, and we're kind of headed towards Cenozoic era, where things were too hot for even mammals, let alone complicated mammals that are trying to run a civilization together. So we're headed towards, with our use of fossil fuels, towards a situation we don't know if it can continue civilization. I like civilization. You guys like it pretty much. You like humans. So we are doing what we can to switch away from fossil fuels and leave that stuff in the ground as much as we can. So around here, the best alternative is solar. There's wind energy, but the technology hasn't quite caught up to our slow and variable winds in Acton. There's hydropower, but we're not really near the big rivers or the ocean tides that are helpful for that. So here we have solar. There's plenty of it. It's the sun that's falling in a very small percentage of Acton would be enough, even with current technology, to meet all the electrical needs of Acton. And we've got at least, last time I checked, we've got at least about 1 billion years to go with the sun, which is a lot of time. Also, we're not displacing ecosystems or large villages of people in order to extract the sun from the sky. Sometimes we cut down a few trees, that's true, but this is New England. We are really good at growing more trees. And of course, this is clean energy. It's coming right to us, right to our panels, and helping to power our houses. So I wanted to thank all of you for being part of this really important work, this civilization-saving work of switching away from fossil fuels. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Jim. Much more motivational than I'll be. So that was great, I think, sort of setting the table and talking about why. So I'm going to help you hopefully talk a little bit more about how. This whole concept of having this educational session sort of came to us 6 months or so ago. And we said, you know, we have this great opportunity, particularly in Massachusetts, because we've got really good financial incentive programs. And but in talking to some neighbors about when they were thinking about solar energy, it just dawned on me that, you know, I know a lot about it because I'm in the business and I've been in the business for a long time, but lots of people don't understand all the issues. And there are a lot of issues, there are a lot of considerations. And so what we're hoping to do is to shed some light on that, maybe some pun intended, and help you understand what all the issues are and help you make a decision for yourself that's the right decision. I think from Jim's perspective, to put down more solar in your house, or find out how I can maybe get more solar. If it's not on my house, maybe you can participate through other programs, like a community solar program that we're going to talk about tonight. So just to, not to complicate it, but I do want you to think a little bit about what some of the things are on the next slide, Greg. Thank you. So when you think about solar and you think about putting solar on your house, and this is something that individuals can do and getting some energy independence, which is different than, I think, a lot of other renewable energy options. You have to think about, well, is my house facing in the right direction? Is it facing south? Do I have trees around it? What's the condition of my roof? If I put on solar panels on my roof, is the roof going to last the 20 years that the solar panels will be up there? Maybe could I put it in my backyard? And then maybe the other thing that I think people think about is, well, what do my neighbors think? How will it affect the value of my home? I'm not sure we're going to have all the answers for you, but we're going to try to touch on some of these things. The next biggest thing people think about is how am I going to pay for it, because it is expensive. Think about you're paying for a machine one time, and that's going to give you energy for the next 20 or 30 years. So it is very expensive, but has very low operating costs. So how do I pay for it? Am I going to pay for it myself? I have money in the bank that I'm willing to take out for this investment. You can take advantage of a federal incentive program called investment tax credits. That's an important thing to understand. In the state, they have another financial incentive program, so-called solar renewable energy credits. We're going to talk about that. The state also has a loan program. Again, another great program. That's why I think, again, in Massachusetts, we're very fortunate to the extent that the state is very progressive. We have a lot of these programs. A lot of states do not. The other option is third-party financing. And one thing to understand when you put solar on your roof is net metering. A lot of things going on. We're going to try to shed some light on that. Last but not least, for people that can't put it on the roof, maybe there's a community solar program that's available to you. So fortunately, we have 3 experts this evening that have volunteered their time. These people spend, you know, their careers, their jobs, their daytime jobs in the business. I think they have some good information for you to help, again, help educate you and help you make a decision. So our first speaker is Andrew Belden. Andrew's from the Clean Energy Center, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and he's going to talk about some of these programs that the state of Massachusetts offers to homeowners. Great. Andrew?
Thanks. Appreciate it. So, as Dennis was saying, I'm Andy Belden. I'm with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. We are the quasi-state agency that's in charge of economic development in the clean energy sector in Massachusetts. Been there 7 months. I'm just getting my head around what a quasi-state agency is, so we'll bore you all with that tonight. But what we do, we have a whole series of programs. That little 1/20th of a cent that you pay into renewable energy charge on your bill for every kilowatt hour of power. That comes to us to help do things like run a mass solar loan program, or work on workforce development for solar, or make actual small investments in promising startups in Massachusetts. So if it's involved with clean energy and growing the clean energy economy in Massachusetts, we're likely engaged in it. Yes. So I'm going to go over some specifics about the Massachusetts market, some of the things that are driving that market, and then also give you some background on solar technology. We also provided our residential guide to solar. I'm happy to say that it is currently accurate. In Massachusetts, with solar policy, when you print something out, things may change rather rapidly, but that's hot off the presses from a couple of days ago. So with that, I think I'll just try doing this. So a couple of facts about Massachusetts. So there's about a $700 million a year market for solar here in the Commonwealth. There are more than That's updated. There's more than 45,000 solar installations in the state already. So this is not a space-age technology. This is not new. This is not something people are piloting. It's real, and it's being installed all over the state. In 2014, and actually this also needs to be updated since the numbers are new. In 2015, Massachusetts was ranked 4th nationally in terms of total solar installations. So we punch well above our weight in terms of solar installations, be it places like Arizona and Nevada and Utah that you might imagine have great solar resources and a lot of land to install it. And really critically for us as an economic development agency, there are 15,000 folks employed in solar currently in Massachusetts as of last year. How do we want to do this? Yeah. So I'm just going to go over some technology basics. So when we talk about solar, there's actually a range of different technologies that people call solar. And these are 3 of those that are out there. The first on our left is something called solar hot water. And this is a technology that's literally been around probably over 120 years. And with solar hot water, typically what you do is you install panels on your roof. Those panels circulate water through them. The sun hits those panels, heats up your water, so you don't have to use oil or electricity for domestic hot water purposes. You can also use that technology for space heating, although we don't see a lot of that here in Massachusetts. The next in the middle technology is something called concentrating solar power. So these are the type of installations that you see in places like the desert Southwest, where there's massive 100-acre, 1,000-acre fields with mirrors. And those mirrors reflect the sunlight on a fluid. That fluid heats up to a point where it's boiling, and that turns a traditional turbine. So we're not going to see a lot of those, or actually not going to see any of those in Massachusetts, in part because we don't have the land for that, and also because the nature of the sunlight that we get here in Massachusetts really doesn't make that a viable option. So, next. So the technology we're really talking about when we say solar in Massachusetts is solar photovoltaics, usually abbreviated solar PV. And this is a technology where it's essentially a plate of silicon. It's chemically treated. When light hits that silicon, it produces a current, and that current can generates electricity that can be used in your home. So just to go over some of the typical components that we have for a solar PV system, this is really a simplified version of what you'd see on a residence. So we have the panels up top, which again are chemically treated pieces of silicon that when light hits them, there's electricity. The electricity that's produced by those panels is something called direct current. And in your homes and power that we get off the grid, it's actually something called alternating current. So in order to use the energy that comes from those panels, that direct current needs to be turned into alternating current. And that's done by a device called an inverter. And this is a central inverter. Some inverters are actually mounted up underneath each individual panel for a system. That's actually what we're seeing a lot of right now in Massachusetts. And some inverters are just boxes that can be mounted in your garage or in your basement or somewhere. And that takes the power, transfers it into alternating current that can be used in your home. So the power comes off the panels, goes through the inverters, and goes into your home where it's used. Now in Massachusetts, we have something that's called net metering. So if you're not home in the middle of the day, it's sunny out, those panels are producing a lot of power, and you can't use all that power, what you can actually do is export that power back onto the grid. And in simplest terms, what happens is your meter will start running backwards. And if at the end of the month you've exported more power than you've used, your utility will actually give you a credit on your bill that you can use in future months. So that's a key piece of one of the foundational policies in Massachusetts, the ability to send that power back out of the grid at that retail rate. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. One of the things that we frequently hear from folks that don't know a whole lot about solar is, yeah, but it's Massachusetts, we're in New England, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense here, right? Because, what about the desert Southwest? So globally, the country with the most installed solar capacity is actually Germany. And this is a map of the amount of sunlight that hits both the United States and Germany on an annual basis. So on this graph, or on this map, the reds and the yellows are more sunlight, the blues and the purples are less sunlight. And what you'll see is in Massachusetts, we get significantly more sunlight than they do in Germany. Germany is actually on a latitude, which always surprises me, of about New Brunswick, or actually a little bit more north. So we've got plenty of sun in Massachusetts. If they can make it work in Germany, we can make it work here, and we are making it work here. So another thing, aside from a viable solar resource that's driving the growth of this market, is the fact that costs for solar installations have been declining. And as with any new technology, the more people that are manufacturing that technology, the more people that are installing that technology, the more people that are buying that technology, the more the prices come down. And since 1980, there's been a consistent year-over-year 10% drop in the cost of solar over that period of time. So that's unlike most other technologies that are out there. So the rapid growth of the marketplace is in part being driven by the fact that costs have been coming down considerably. And what's exciting is we still think those costs, particularly in Massachusetts, can continue to decline, making solar more cost competitive. And really from our perspective as a state agency, one that provides funding through incentives, our goal is to get the technology to the point where we don't have to intervene in this market anymore. We don't have to put out incentives. So we feel like the trajectory is really heading in the right direction, and we're looking forward to a point in time when we don't have to provide those incentives. So, next. So the Massachusetts market, as I've mentioned, has grown pretty rapidly. This actually needs to get updated as well because we don't have the final numbers for 2015, but that number should be around the same as it was for 2014. But the passage of the Green Communities Act in 2009 and the implementation of a couple of incentives at the state level, we've seen this rapid growth in the state that we're hoping if some things go right in the legislature in the next couple of weeks, will continue. So, next slide. So, talk a little about the technology, a little bit about the market here in Massachusetts. And I'm going to talk about some of the policies and some of the things that are driving this market. And there's a lot of complexity here, so happy to take questions. Oh, yeah.
The cost chart that you showed,
yes.
Is that gross or is that net of subsidies?
That is gross.
Cool.
So yeah, usually when people are talking about, because the subsidies are somewhat complicated and there's, it depends on what you're taking, what you're not, people usually talk about the gross costs. And that's, if you're out in the market looking to buy solar, it's always a good thing to ask is to get a clear understanding of what the gross cost is before subsidies so that you can compare apples to apples, because there's a lot of different ways you can slice those numbers. So one of the things that we have kind of going for us in Massachusetts for the solar market is the fact that we have somewhat high power prices. And when I say that, means we have to have that going for us. If the power from the grid is expensive, it makes more sense for you to generate that power yourself. So that the value of what you're offsetting with your own generation has greater economic value to you. So that's a piece that really quote unquote helps us here in Massachusetts in terms of building a viable solar market. Those reduced costs have also been driving our market. State incentives, which we'll get into, and federal incentives are the other pieces that really, when you stack it up, it makes owning a solar system really pretty attractive right now in Massachusetts. So, good. So tax benefits. One of the ways the federal government in particular likes to incentivize people and help them make choices in the market is to provide tax incentives. And right now for solar, there's a pretty generous federal tax incentive. It's called the investment tax credit. And it's worth 30% of the system cost. So it's a credit, not a deduction, which means if you buy a $30,000 PV system in December, by April you can have a $9,000 tax credit that you can claim. The great thing about this subsidy is that in the event that you can't use it all in one particular taxable year, you can carry it over year, so you can make sure you get the full benefit of that eventually. Another important federal incentive, and this is for commercial systems, not necessarily, not really applicable to residential systems. Solar PV systems are durable. They're typically warranted, at least for the production, for 20 to 25 years. Not a lot of moving parts, not a lot of things to break. So for accounting purposes, that's something that should be depreciated over a 20-year life or so. The federal government allows businesses to depreciate that over 5 years. So that's a pretty significant tax benefit, and one of the reasons why we're seeing leasing companies offer these third-party ownership deals that we're going to talk about later. And then also in Massachusetts, we have a state tax credit, and for most people that's $1,000 as well. So the main state level incentive that's been driving this rapid growth in Massachusetts is, as Dennis mentioned, solar renewable energy certificates. So in Massachusetts, the utilities and the electricity service providers, they're required to increase the amount of renewable energy they buy year over year. It's called a renewable portfolio standard. And as part of that obligation, there's a separate carve-out in Massachusetts that's specifically for solar PV systems that are located in the state. So as the amount of renewable energy they need to buy goes up, so does the amount of solar energy go up. So in order for the electricity providers to meet that obligation, they don't usually build those PV systems themselves. What they do is they go out on the market and purchase credits from people like you who build systems, or from businesses that have built systems. So there's an active and robust market for these certificates out there. And in Massachusetts, the way the structure of that market works keeps the value of those incentives pretty high. So for every megawatt hour of power you can produce, that might be worth $250, $275, $300 per megawatt hour. So that's a pretty hefty benefit, and we can talk about some of the specifics on this incentive later. One of the challenges in the marketplace, and we want to make sure that we're very clear about this, is that there's a cap currently in place for this incentive. And we have reached that cap for commercial systems. For residential scale systems, we're very close to reaching that cap. I don't have an answer for anybody about when that situation is going to clarify itself. What I can tell you is that my friends over at the Department of Energy Resources, this is the #1 thing they're thinking about right now. This is the #1 thing that the environmental agencies in the state are thinking about. It's also something that the legislature is also thinking about very carefully. So our hope is that this situation, where there's this cap that's really going to affect the potential future growth of the market and really the potential future economics of systems, is that that's going to get resolved in the very near term. I wish I had more I could say on that, but that's where we are at this point. Yes?
Another question. Similarly, I think on net metering as well, there's caps and stuff, right? So you can talk about that.
Yeah, so I'll briefly touch on that as well. We got a lot going on right now in Massachusetts. So next slide. So just a couple other points on those solar renewable energy certificates. As I said, there's a 1,600 megawatt cap at the moment. System owners are allowed to generate and sell those solar renewable energy certificates for a 10-year period. So it's a pretty substantial and long-term benefit. Prices vary based on the kind of supply and demand in the marketplace. The state sets a maximum value for those credits, a value over which the utilities just won't buy them, or the electricity providers won't buy them. And there's this special auction mechanism that's an effort to try to make sure that the price of that market doesn't collapse as well. That's very unique to Massachusetts. It's been relatively successful so far at kind of balancing supply and demand in the marketplace. So, net metering. As I said, in Massachusetts, if you own a residential solar PV system, you can hook it up to the grid. If you're producing more power than you're using, your meter will essentially spin backwards, although these days the meters are all digital, so they don't really spin. But that's essentially the principle. In Massachusetts, for systems that are 25 kilowatts and under, if there are 3-phase, or 10 kilowatts and under for single phase, and I know I'm talking gibberish and I apologize. So for most residential systems, the issue of a cap on net metering is not really a huge deal, because for those systems, there is essentially no cap on net metering. For larger systems, for some of the larger residential systems that might be 12 or 15 kilowatts, there's some concerns because there's a cap on net metering that's currently been hit in the national grid territory and could be hit very shortly in other territories. Yes?
What does net metering cap mean?
So the utilities are allowed a certain percentage of their total load can be, there's a capacity cap for the amount of net metering that the utilities can approve. So that's another issue that's currently in the legislature, is raising that cap or limiting that cap or changing the value of those net metering credits.
So I guess simply, if you generate more than you produce over a year, do you make money or do they take the credit away?
So the way it works in Massachusetts, that credit rolls over. So they're never going to write you a check. But what will happen is that on your bill, there'll be like a negative credit. So you'll be able to use that at a later date. One of the unique and interesting things about Massachusetts is you can actually, if you build up those credits, or if you build the system so it's over the size of your load, you can actually transfer those credits to someone else. So you can transfer them to a friend or a relative or a church or a nonprofit, or there's a lot of various things that you can do if you have a system that's overproducing. Yes.
Going back to the SREC caps,
Yes.
what happens if we are over that and more number of credits are being generated, or do they just not give you any certificates once the cap is reached?
So the way it will work is the systems that have already qualified, that have reached that 1,600 megawatt of capacity cap, those will continue to generate over the next 10 years of their life. New systems won't qualify for that incentive.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in the back, sorry. Yeah.
So a similar question on net metering. So let's say I'm over the 10 kilowatt thing and I get in today. Does that mean I'm secure for the rest of the net metering qualification, or barring any legislation changes and all that stuff, but can NSTAR, for example, come back and say, well, we've hit our cap and now we're going to prorate it to all our customers?
No.
Yeah. That is not necessarily a concern. I will. One thing that you may have heard about in Nevada, it's a situation that is unprecedented and not something I expect ever to happen in a place like Massachusetts. But the Utility Commission there actually chose not to grandfather existing systems when they updated the net metering rules, and there's significant lawsuits, and it remains to be seen how that's all going to play out. No one in Massachusetts is contemplating anything like that. I would be very surprised if anyone, if that could happen in a place like this. Sorry.
Yeah, my question was, I had heard in a discussion of solar power in Acton or in Massachusetts that the utilities were actually wanting to do away with net metering for residences. Is that true, or what's the status of it?
So at the moment, we've heard nothing from the utilities about net metering for residences. It's kind of a foundation, and that really hasn't been a part of the conversation about what the future of net metering. Largely, the discussion is about larger systems. Utilities have some differences of opinion about the appropriate value for large ground-mounted systems that are exporting power to the grid instead of serving loads. So that's really what the battle is at the legislature at the moment. What the value of that net metering credit that gets exported is going to be, because that can significantly influence essentially the basics of the economics of the system. So.
So it could have an indirect impact on the residents.
It could, and it would definitely have an impact on what Ben's going to talk about, which is community shared solar.
So it would have an impact on, if you had solar on of a school roof, a large facility, or like we have in Acton, we have it on the landfill,
Yeah.
and that power is sold to the municipality, to the town of Acton, so that would have an impact on those kind of projects, but not on something, not on a small scale system on your roof.
Unless it upset the whole economics of solar power. I don't see that.
I don't see that.
I was just going to add, one of the reasons that I'm pretty confident in the industry in Massachusetts that what happened in Nevada won't happen in Massachusetts is net metering rules are set in legislation by your representatives and senators on Beacon Hill. They're not set by a small group of people, so they're answerable to us.
Yes,
And the more of us, the voice for those legislators.
thank you.
I don't want to be negative, but I think that it's important to remember that we all pay for the net metering. So if you have solar or don't have solar, you still pay for the net metering. So it's important to remember that, and this is, I think we'll probably see some changes. I don't think we'll see net metering go away, but I think we may see some changes, and I think we may see some big changes in the SRECs.
Yeah, and I think in large part there's wide consensus on kind of the solar industry and the utility industry side of things, that the SREC, the next iteration of an SREC program can have a pretty substantial decrease in the total incentive. And the conversation about net metering is literally the conversation that's happening in every state that has it in the country right now. No one's figured out the secret sauce and the exact right number. There's dueling spreadsheets on both sides about what the right number is. There are people that will tell you net meter is a subsidy, and there's people that will tell you that solar is providing significantly more benefits to the grid than it's receiving that. So we'll stay tuned, folks. We'll find out soon where the legislature lands and all that. So when you stack it all up, just ran some quick numbers in terms of the relative value of each of those incentive streams. This is for the $5,000 or $20,000 system. Over the life of the system, about a third or a little more than a third of the value comes from those SRECs. Another third or more than a third comes from that value of power. And then the tax credits amount to a little less than a third. So it kind of gives you a sense of where that value, those value streams are all coming from. So get to plug my own program at this point. So back in December, the Mass CEC, in partnership with its sister agency, the Department of Energy Resources, launched the Mass Solar Loan Program. In Massachusetts, we have a pretty diverse residential solar market with a lot of third-party ownership companies, companies that will come in and own the systems on your behalf, pardon me, and then sell you the power off them. And we also have a lot of installers that are doing direct ownership deals. So one of the things that the state took a look at in a study back in 2013 is kind of the net economic benefits of those models. And what they discovered is that the state could really use, and residents could really use some more options in terms of actually owning those systems themselves. So what the DOER did is set aside $30 million for this program, the Mass Solar Loan. As I mentioned, launched back in December. We are working with a network of local lenders, your community banks, and your credit unions to provide a series of subsidies. One of those subsidies is what's called an interest rate buy-down. So if you sign up with a lending provider under this program and one of our participating installers, if the bank would have charged you 6% for a 10-year loan, they're going to charge you 3% because we're providing that extra 3% for limited time for a small amount of the program. Also, the Baker-Polito administration is very interested in making sure that a wide array of people in all communities are able to access these solar incentives that are out there. As you might know, people with low and moderate incomes may have issues accessing or installing something like a solar system. So one of the things that we're providing as part of this loan program is an income-based loan support. So if you qualify, if your income is below 120% of the state median income for your family, we will provide a direct incentive of between 20 and 30% to essentially be like a principal payment for that loan. So it's a pretty substantial benefit for people who may not have previously been able to take advantage of many of the benefits of solar. And then the final thing.
So I'm just curious, so what is the median income?
So right now the number is set at $88,000 for a family.
So if you make
$88,000 or
less than 88, you would qualify for this?
It's 88 and change, but
Okay.
yes.
All right.
So the way we verify that, send your tax returns into the IRS, they give us a yay or nay, and you qualify that incentive, you go to one of our banks, and they can walk you
So
through it.
where do you get this money to support?
So, as part of that renewable portfolio standard that we talked about previously, if the utilities don't actually meet their annual requirements for buying those renewable energy credits, they have to pay a penalty. And so that penalty needs, by statute, to get reinvested in clean energy. And so that's how that money comes to us to offer this program. So right now we have, also needs to be updated, we have 7 lenders participating and 72 installers. If you go to masssolarloan.com, you can find out more specifics on the program, find a list of lenders, and find a list of installers who are currently offering.
Do you talk about the loan loss?
Oh, yeah, and a loan loss reserve. So we're also providing a benefit. One of the things that we heard about is that for a lot of these lenders, the credit score requirements are very high, given that it's unsecured financing. So we're providing a modest loan loss reserve to get some of those lenders to think about some folks who may not have typically qualified under their underwriting standards, on the idea that these systems actually provide net cash flow on a typical basis. So that's why we're providing that. And that's it. So happy to take your questions. Happy to kind of sit on the panel and take questions as we go. So thanks.
Thanks, Andy. So Kimberly is going to talk about if you're considering putting solar on your home, there's a plethora of companies out there that are well-qualified installers in the state. And so Kimberly works for a company called Energy Sage, and they help residential homeowners select a solar installer. So Kimberly will tell us about that program and how it works.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Kimberly. I represent Energy Stage. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to come out and actually learn about this stuff. Solar is something that I'm extremely passionate about. Can you go to the next slide? So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background about myself, my experience within the solar space. Then we'll touch a little bit about solar. Andy already gave a really nice overview. And then we'll introduce you into the Energy Stage marketplace and why you might not want to shop without us. And lastly, give you some market insights. We do work.
There's a microphone. Kimberly, you have a wonderful soft voice, and it might benefit from a microphone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Sorry. And lastly, we'll end with some market insights. We do work in the mass market and have lots of data regarding what people are installing on their roofs, and also some pricing as well. So this is me. I'm a senior solar advisor at Energy Sage. That pretty much just means that I know a good amount about solar. I also worked at 2 solar installation companies prior to joining Energy Sage in April of 2014. I also chair the Residential Green Building Committee at the U.S. Green Building Council, and I believe they also certified this building being a LEED building. And lastly, I have my green designation with the National Association of Realtors. So I've been involved in solar and clean energy for a long time. So a little bit about solar. I think it's important to ask why. Like, why go solar? Why am I involved in this type of space, and why should you guys consider it? The main reason is because it saves a lot of money. People, unfortunately, would not probably go solar unless it actually saved them a good amount off of their electric bill. So that's the main reason why people are installing systems. The environmental aspect and saving carbon emissions, that's an add-on benefit. It's a bonus, but it's definitely not like the main reason. And the next thing is rising utility rates. If you look at your electric bill over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you will see those rates have been increasing. They have not gone down. So we want to save you from these rising utility rates into the future. And lastly, as Andy mentioned earlier, it's a great investment. The utility company is paying you guys to go solar, so why not, right? And so, next slide. And so, I'll briefly just go over this since Andy already went over it earlier. So you install the panels, and then there's electricity that's generated through the inverter. It goes into the utility grid, and then that's how it powers your house. And so, instead of using the utility company, you're now pretty much your own producer. And so because I've worked with so many different homeowners working in the solar industry, I run into a lot of questions. I get asked a lot of the same questions. And so some of these up here are what people ask. So how much will I pay for solar? That's something that is a little tough to answer, right? Because no one system is the same. How big of a system do I need today and possibly for the future? Are you considering buying an electric car, right? How do you size your system appropriately to meet the future demands that you might use? How do I compare quotes? How do I know what metrics to look at, right? So we'll definitely go over that as well. How can I tell panels apart from one another? There are so many panel manufacturers producing panels. How do you know the difference between a high efficiency or a standard efficiency panel? What about the equipment? And is blank a good solar installer? Andy mentioned earlier there are over 70 involved in the Mass Solar program. Back 2 years ago, there was over 200 licensed installers that can install a system on your roof. How do you know if Joe in the Truck Solar is a good installer or not, right? So we'll definitely help you with that. And lastly, how do you know you should buy or lease a system? Depending on what your goals are, one might be better for you, so we'll definitely dive into that as well. And so a little bit about Energy Sage now. So we have an awesome resource to help you come to some sort of conclusion with what you want to do, depending on what you want to learn. If you like to read a lot, we have articles and blogs to help you as a resource. We also have presentations and videos to help you understand solar and what your options could possibly be. If you want to be more interactive, join our Q&A forum, right? Talk to people who are either currently shopping for a system, ask questions, maybe answer some questions, or talk to solar advisors at Energy Sage. There's so much support for you in the industry, objective support to just help you, come to some sort of conclusion whether it's the right option for you or not. And then we also have a directory of manufacturers and suppliers and installers and inverter companies with ratings and reviews to help you sift through, which one might be good, which one might not be so good, right? So there's just lots of information out there. And so once you're ready to start shopping for a system and you've read enough articles and read all of our blogs, it's actually quite quick and simple. It takes a few minutes to register your property online onto the marketplace. You confirm your home on a satellite image. You provide some electric bill details, and then if you have any preferences for financing or for equipment, you can also set that as well. And then from there, solar installers that we have vetted through a 10-point checklist are able to quote you on the marketplace. And so these quotes are in a standardized format. So we make the same assumptions for utility inflation rates and for SREC values. So that way, no one installer can make their quotes look significantly better than the next. Everything's on the same level playing field. And so you're able to compare and shop for a solar system in the most effective way possible. And so the solar marketplace would not be successful
if it was not a win-win for all parties involved, right? So for the customer, for the homeowner, for you guys, you're saving a ton of money because you're actually shopping around, you're comparing, you have installers bidding for your business. Isn't that nice to have people like sort of fight over you, right? And then for solar installers, they're saving money because they're lowering their customer acquisition costs, and because they're saving money on that, they're actually passing those savings on to you, so then you save more overall. And so, and the best part about Energy Sage is this robust quote comparison tool. And so there's 3 things that you should consider when you're shopping for a system. There's just 3 things to think about. Who's installing your system, what equipment is going on your roof, and how will you pay for it? That's it. There's some details within those 3 decisions, but that's all you really have to think about. And so I want to ask you guys here, who has gone through some sort of home improvement project before? Great, most of you. How long did that take you? Right? It took some time. How many phone calls, how many times did you have to give the same information over and over? How many quotes, how many emails did you have to look through? How many PDFs did you have to look at and try to compare pricing and possible equipment? There's so much. Why not do it all in one place? And at the same time, if you look at the first line right below the logos of the companies, you have star ratings. You are actually able to read through what other people are saying about working with this specific installer. So the ratings and review feature with our suppliers actually are a great help for you guys to understand and know who you're actually working with, because believe it or not, whoever's installing your system, you guys will be involved for a very long time, so might as well like who you're working with. And so, because we work with so many different installers and so many different customers on the marketplace, we have lots of data that I'd like to share with you. So, what equipment is being used? What are people actually selecting to go on the roof? So we have the top 5 panel brands on the left here. So some names it might kind of sound familiar. You have LG and we have Hyundai. Yes, they also play in the solar space. They do manufacture solar panels. You have Solar World. They've been around for over 3 decades. They were one of the market leaders in the solar space before a ton of other competitors came in and also manufactured panels. You have SunPower. They make the most efficient panels on the market. There's nothing more powerful than a SunPower panel. Comes at a price premium, yes, but that's okay. Depends on what you like, right? There's options. It's all about having options and being able to compare what is available to you. We also have inverter companies, and so every single supplier, manufacturer on Energy Sage has their own profile. You're able to understand their warranty, where they're manufacturing their products, where they're located, right? So some of these things might matter. And so going back to the panels, Solar World, US brand. People like supporting locals, and so it's a very efficient way, like I said, to shop and understand the equipment on your roof and who you're actually working with. So we talked about the first 2 things, right? Who's installing on the roof and the type of equipment that will go on that roof. So how are you going to pay for it? If we look here, you know, it's fine. Going into solar is very similar to getting a car. Who here has a car? Everyone has a car. Right, so same thing. You can pay cash for your system. You can finance it through a loan, or you can go into a lease or PPA agreement. Depending on what your goals are and what matters most to you, there's an option for you that will work. National average shows that 40% of people are are owning their system. 60% is leasing. But on Energy Sage, because we have such a robust resource center to help you understand the economics of going solar, we are finding that our shoppers, people who are taking a little bit more time to educate themselves on the market, are actually owning their system. Because when you own your system, it's a lot more benefits to you in the long term. We are forward-thinking people. So in Massachusetts, 100% of you guys are actually owning your system. And why not, right? Especially now. Especially right now, if you're comparison shopping and you have multiple options, like it kind of makes sense. So I want to share a story with you guys. There was a customer, so sad. There was a customer that came onto Energy Sage, and he already, started working with a larger installer in the state. And he wanted to see what other quotes he can possibly get. So he registered, he created his profile, and unfortunately, he already signed with this larger provider, and he ended up spending a little bit over than $10,000 to work with that installer. He could have saved over $10,000 if he just spent a little bit of time to compare. Whether you're comparing on Energy Sage or not, at least compare and get some options. Talk to multiple installers. Do not just talk with one or two. Talk to a few. Talk to some people that can give you objective, information that is unbiased. And at Energy Sage, we can do that for you. We'll hold your hand through the process, and we'll just help you. We'll answer questions that you might be shy to ask an installer. Energy Sage, we are in a very unique situation because we're not tied to any installer or any component or any bank. So we can really just help you figure out what you're looking at, help you understand the metrics, and build confidence so you can feel empowered to make a decision. Hopefully that decision is that you are going to go solar. And so if you get anything out of this today, it's compare. Hopefully it's on Energy Sage, but if not, at least get multiple quotes. And so, as we saw earlier, if you own your system in Massachusetts, there's a lot more benefit there. And now with the Mass Solar loan being at 3.25%, it totally makes sense. The amount that you're paying per month for your loan is less than what you're paying for your utility bill. It's a no-brainer. Why would you not go solar? It's like you're giving money to the utility company monthly, forever, when you don't have to. You can save yourself from that. And so, please don't take my word for it. There are so many different mediums that's talking about Energy Sage and how we're changing the game in solar. And there's also national nonprofits like that Cute Panda, World Wildlife, and we work with them. We work with other national nonprofits. We also work with larger corporations and companies like Staples and Walgreens, which is not on there. They trust us as the online marketplace to help their followers, to help their people go solar. And I want to point out, the utility companies are also working with us. Yes, they're working with us. People want to go solar because they want to stay away from the utility company. But hey, they're doing their thing and they're helping us go solar. They're doing net metering so that way you guys can be connected and harness and utilize the power that you're generating. And so I wouldn't say the utility company is too bad because they are helping us out. And I think with that, I'll leave it up to questions. Yes.
Well, you say that the cost of the loan is less than what you're paying utilities. Say you're paying $100 a month on your utilities. How much of that are you saving by having the solar, and does it offset the loan? Or are you paying more than $100 a month to have the solar, but eventually in several years you'll be able to make it more of a benefit than a cost?
So with the solar loan, the amount that you're paying per month once you apply for the loan and actually have the loan will be less than what you're paying for your utility company on a monthly basis on average throughout the year. And so depending on how much offset your system can handle, then that's how much coverage you'll have with the loan, right? So if
you can figure that out.
Oh, of course. Every solar installer, when you're getting a quote, and the quotes can also be uploaded online for you to compare side by side. But yeah, every installer will be able to take your usage over the last year, and they'll say, this house is using 5,000 kilowatt hours. This system size, 4.5 kilowatts, will offset 100% of this. This roof can fit this size system. And so with that, they'll give you a loan at 3.25% from the Mass CEC. And yeah, the amount that you'll pay per month for that loan will probably be $80. I'm just saying. It would be under $100 that you're paying to the utility company. So 100% yes. Yes, given you have enough roof space to cover that electric, bill, right? Yes.
You had mentioned, you had shown cost per watt, but it was for 2014, I thought. Do you have updated numbers?
We do have some updated numbers. That is, we are releasing our updated market intel report, so that should be coming out on Energy Sage over the next few weeks. The slide that I showed with the cost per watt, that's specifically for Massachusetts, so you'll be able to find that information as well.
And also, you can check out masssolarloan.com. We just posted the first 3 months performance of the program, and you can see what kind of, almost in real time, what the pricing we're seeing.
Where does your funding come from?
Question. So initially, when Energy Stage first came out into the market, we were funded by the Department of Energy. So we are a 2-time Sunshot Initiative award winner. And what is the Sunshot Initiative, right? We want more people to go solar for various reasons. We want prices to go down so that way more people can adopt the technology and be able to afford it. And so the Sunshot Initiative funds different companies to meet that goal, to lower the cost down of solar so more people can adopt. And so that's how we got funded before. And now when we work with solar installers, because as mentioned earlier, we're not tied to any one installer, we're not tied to any component or finance company. And so because we have a marketplace where we vet installers, once an installer through our marketplace gets a signed contract with the customer and you guys become good friends, they pay us a small finder's fee. It's a nominal fee, and this fee is less than what they would have typically paid to acquire a customer. So national averages show that the average customer acquisition cost is between $3,000 to $4,000 in the solar industry. That's a lot of money that is being passed on to you. So we're helping, and installers are saving 50% or more off of that cost by working with Energy Sage. So that's how we're funded. Well, that's how we stay in business. Great. Thank you. Oh, yes.
So you had shown the chart with the cash versus loan versus leasing options, and I forget now what the percentages were, but in Massachusetts, is the majority of the customers going for the cash option? Is that what that chart said? Because I couldn't really read the chart very well.
Yeah, so most people are financing their system. Yeah, most people are financing to some degree, whether it's leasing or taking out a loan, but in Massachusetts, on Energy Stage specifically, people are, they're owning their systems.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Who does maintenance, whether it's being bought outright or loaned?
So if you own, so in general, there's no moving parts, and Andy mentioned this earlier. Because there's no moving parts, it just sort of sits flush on the roof, or it's sitting flush like on a ground mount type application. There's really nothing that can break down. And you also have a monitoring system that comes with your solar system. So you're able to see how much your panels are producing. So you'll know immediately if your panels are underproducing, because it's kind of addictive. When people go solar, they'll look at their phones every few minutes and say, "Oh my God, I'm producing energy! Look, it's crazy." People do this stuff, but they're just excited. And that's a lovely thing.
So there's no maintenance.
There's virtually no maintenance. I mean, we don't recommend for you to ever go on the roof and clean it. We let Mother Nature take care of that when she rains, right? You can occasionally, from the ground level, just hose down the solar panels.
Snow, though. Snow will cover it, and how does the snow get removed?
Yeah, so if you look at any house with solar panels, the first part of the roof when it's snowing that has the snow melting off will be the side where the panels are, because the panels, they're always working, so they always generate a little bit of heat. And so if we're experiencing a blizzard, then yes, that would take a little bit longer for it to melt off. But if we get some snow that we did over the last couple of days, you'll just sort of see it just melt.
But if you own it,
Yes.
wouldn't you need a battery to store the power if you're not on the grid?
Well, so, I mean, yes and no. Batteries are super expensive. And
Tesla came out with something that for $3,500 a panel just recently. And
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about maintenance, keeping up, because it's nice to be able to buy something outright if you want to get off the grid, but then who you go to take care of it if you need.
So
The
yes.
same company that installed it will be happy to maintain it for you. So whether you financed it or whether you paid for it yourself, you still hire a contractor to put it up there. And he's a licensed electrician. And then if you did have a problem, you can call them and they would take care of the problem for you. I think it's interesting. I was talking to Debbie and Del and Greg Voss before the meeting. You've got a solar system that's been installed for how many years?
2+.
So have you ever had a problem with it?
Never.
Yeah, so I think, to support what Kimberly was saying, These are sort of solid state devices, the panels, there's no moving parts, and they're very reliable. So the chance, you know, there's certain things always, you know, even TVs break down, computers break down, but the chance of that happening is pretty small. But there's always somebody there that will help you out, and you know, and they're gonna, you know, depending on what sort of arrangement you have, they might charge you for that maintenance, but it's going to be very small in the big picture of what it's going to cost you.
And most installers, when you work with them, they offer a labor warranty, and every panel manufacturer offers, I believe, 20 to 25 years performance warranty. So most panels, if not all panels, at year 20, you're guaranteed to produce up to 80% of what you were producing in day one. So the panels will last you a very long time, and you know, with monitoring, you'll know immediately if something's breaking down. Yes?
What's the recycling process for panels when they get to 30 years and they're not producing?
So I would say in 30 years they will most likely still be producing. But yes,
So that's a really cool question. And right now in this country there isn't an answer to that question. When I've been asked that question by our customers, I will often say what I'm going to say to you, which is when it becomes a challenge, there's a lot of valuable resource locked up in the solar panels. And when there's a market for disposing of them, there'll be a service to take care of it.
A good benchmark there is what's happening in Germany with panel recycling legislation. They've actually mandated that companies have to take back the panels that they sold previously, and it's created a lot of accountability on the part of manufacturers to have.
So like if today, if I wanted to get rid of a television or something, I have to pay $50
Right.
To get rid of that at the dump. And so if I have 30 panels on my roof, you know, that's $1,500 worth of disposal costs.
Yeah, but boy, those panels are worth a lot more than
Right, no, I
money.
but and that's just as far as I can tell, just crushing them up and burying them underground.
Yeah, I'm counting on the next 30 years to get us to Germany.
And I would also say that over the next 30 years, while you're using your panels, other people are buying panels. And so all of a sudden, the mass of panels that are out there are creating a marketplace to either recycle them or reuse them or remanufacture them in some way. So we as consumers are developing a mass to talk to our legislature to develop new policies so that we don't have that situation in the future.
thank you everyone for contributing to that answer. Yes?
What are the panels made of, and where are they made?
So the panels can be, I mean, I guess it depends on the manufacturer. There's some panels that are made in the U.S., some of them are made in Europe, parts of Europe, and also parts of Asia. In terms of what it's made of, there's, oh jeez. This is something that I should know.
They're made of silicon?
Silicon.
Which is
yes.
just, which is just processed sand, so silicon. And there's different types of, there's monocrystalline, there's polycrystalline, there's different types, and they change in efficiency, there are different efficiencies, different costs, but primarily it's a silicon material.
Do they lie flush on the roof?
Yeah.
There's a few inches of space right in between if it's like a roof mount system. So there's like a layer there.
So are they windproof?
Oh yes, they will. I mean, they probably won't last in like a Category 5 hurricane, but yes, they can stand up to like I believe 125-mile-per-hour winds.
They have to meet building code, so whatever the building code is for safe construction in your town, in the town of Acton, they have to meet that same building code. So they have to be resistant to whatever wind level the rest of your house is resistant to. So it's as safe as the rest of your house.
How do you advise people to deal with insurance?
Okay.
Is it something that homeowner policies cover? Do you need a separate policy?
So it depends on who your insurance company is. I would definitely let them know that you now have solar panels on your roof. I've heard both stories where insurance companies won't charge an extra premium for having solar panels, but then some might because it's now attached to the roof. And so it depends on your insurance company.
We had no change to our home insurance at all.
Is it covered?
Yep.
same deductible.
Yes.
I have some follow-up questions in terms of some practicalities that new people like me think about. Like where I live in Acton, lots of big oak trees, and they're always dropping branches when there's a windstorm or a snowstorm, whatever, branches all over the yard. Now, occasionally some will fall on the roof. And now you just said they have to be as strong as my roof. So are they going to break if a modest-sized branch falls on them? So that's a maintenance question, if they're going to break, or are they as strong as my roof?
Yeah, so if something happens to the panels, and I believe this is written in the warranty information with the manufacturers, if something out of your control, nature-made, I think force majeure, then it's covered under the panel manufacturer's warranty. So if a big tree fell during a storm, then that would be covered under their warranty.
I don't think that's 100% correct. I think if a branch fell and it did damage it, your homeowner's insurance would cover that to the extent that it is covered. So you want to register it with your homeowner insurance company, talk with them, and if it was damaged, just like your house was damaged with a branch falling down, that homeowner's insurance would cover that as well.
Are they more likely to be damaged than, say, my roof?
Yes, it
I would
depends.
think they would.
Well, the panels are a lot stronger, so they can take a lot more than your roof can.
No, they can't.
It depends.
They may have strong
Okay,
glass.
it depends. Now, my other question is, one of the earlier speakers said, well, one of your considerations is how old your roof is. Is your roof going to last as long as 20 years?
Yeah, so it's not recommended to install solar panels on a roof unless you have at least 10 years of life left on that roof.
What would happen in 10 years or 15 years if you...
So yeah, so the area where the solar panels are, well, that part of the roof will be protected and covered. So it actually extends the life of the roof. So it's the areas where there's no solar panels, you might need to replace that portion, like the north side or something, but on the south side where the panels are, you wouldn't have to worry about that. And it's recommended, so it's also recommended for you to replace your roof if you have less than 10 years. And I mean, I think it depends too. I've seen roofs where there's 10 years left, but it's in perfect condition. I've seen some roofs that have 10 years left that needs to be replaced tomorrow. So it can depend. But in Massachusetts, you need to have an engineer sign off on the structural part of your roof. And so if it's found that you can't install panels, then they won't do that, because then that would be on the liability of the engineer.
So you don't need 20 years, 10
years. 10 years of life left is pretty sufficient. Safe. Yes.
There's a comment about the trees. So I've had panels for a few years, and when branches that were at a high risk of falling on the panels were also the same branches that were at the high risk of preventing the system from being efficient. They were blocking the sun. So I chose to remove some trees around my house. So if you decide to go ahead with solar panels, this might be a wonderful time for you to also think about, protecting your roof from all those branches that are falling on it.
Luckily, my trees are not on the south side.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean there wouldn't be, and I've trimmed branches that would fall on my house. But that doesn't mean a wind comes along and...
That's right. You always have to think about that possibility. But for us, at least, we were able
Thanks for that.
We took the excuse to open up a little bit, protect the house a little bit, and bring more sunlight.
Good idea.
I'm happy to take questions afterwards too. One of my awesome colleagues, Aaron, is also here, and he can answer questions as well, but I don't want to take too much time because I know we have one more speaker, but I saw you raise your hand, sir. Do you want to ask the last question?
I'm curious. I came to the meeting. I invited myself, and I'm a guest here, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I'm reading that this is for the Green Acton community, which I've been working in Acton for a couple of years now, and all these questions that I'm hearing about purchasing as far as insurance and responsibility and contractors and everything, but yet I hear no discussion about a PPA. And is that totally out of the realm of things in this meeting, or?
Oh, no, not at all.
I mean, none of these homeowners seem to know that a PPA is available to them.
Sure.
And I hear SREX tax credits, everything, and
So a PPA is a power purchase agreement. It's very similar to leasing solar panels.
no, not at it. It's not like leasing at all.
Leasing is, when you enter into a power purchase agreement, it's still a 20-year agreement, but you're paying the third-party company for the power that's being produced. Versus with the lease, it's like a fixed amount with the utility, with the inflation rate tacked onto that. So it's kind of similar, but yes, it is different. And yes, it is available in Massachusetts, of course. Not for some people, owning might not be the best option for you, which is why you should comparison shop and try to figure out what your goals are. Read through different resources, and from there make a decision if owning is better or if leasing is better. It is available, but in Massachusetts, due to the incentives that we have, the economics just work out so much better if you own your system. Though leasing is definitely available, and I promise you, no installer is going to say, no, I'm not going to take your business because you want to lease. They will offer you whatever it is that you want to do.
So through Energy Sage, you can compare options of what different companies would offer to lease or to offer you a PPA or to pay for yourself.
Exactly.
Right? So you're not, although it sounds like the history of your company and the people that have used your website and your system almost always, if not always, go for financing themselves, that you don't encourage one option versus the other.
It makes no difference to us
Okay.
at all.
Okay.
It's just, like I mentioned earlier, when you create your profile on Energy Sage, you confirm your home on satellite, you provide your electric bill details, and you set any preferences that you want for equipment and financing. So if you prefer leases or PPAs, then that's fine too. If you prefer leases and PPAs, or if you don't know, have the installer give you quotes for all options, and you'll see for yourself the economics just make more sense. You'll save a lot more money over time if you own your system.
I'm not sure if you're being totally objective about it to the extent that you still have to make that investment. You have to have $20,000, $10,000, what it is in the bank, and willing to put that money into it. Some people aren't. So that option is available to people. But
over 70% of active has gone PPA.
That's great. We're not trying to promote one or the other. We just want to make sure people know that they're available.
Again, there's concerns about insurance and trees and everything, and that leads everything.
Right.
I'm confused.
That is an option for sure.
Carbon footprint that we're talking about.
Yep. So you know what? I'm sorry. I just want to, because we do have one more speaker that I think is really important for people to hear about, to hear from, and one more option. Excuse me. So Kimberly, first of all, thank you very much. I really do like the website they offer. A lot of free information. It doesn't cost you anything, and it is helping to drive down the cost of solar. So I think that's an important option. So the last person tonight is Ben, and Ben is from a company called Co-op Power. And one of the options for people that want to buy solar energy but can't put that solar installation on their roof is to do it through community solar. And so Ben's going to talk more about that.
All right. Well, hi everybody. It's a real pleasure to see so many people out here tonight, and I appreciate you sticking around for the last act of the evening, which it's going to be almost as entertaining as the first two, I hope. All right, so my name is Ben Underwood. I work with Co-op Power. Co-op Power is a member-owned cooperative. So we're a consumer cooperative. It's a legal entity that is owned entirely by the members. To become a member of Co-op Power, you pay a membership fee, and then that money goes into creating renewable energy projects in your community that benefit members of the cooperative. We were started about 12 years ago in Hatfield, Massachusetts, around a community-owned biodiesel plant, and now we're moving into the solar scene. So you can go to the next. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about. Who's Co-op Power? I already mentioned that briefly, our experience with solar. What we see is some of the key challenges with, I'll just say solar more generally, and community solar out of that, and then the approach that we've come up with to overcome those challenges. Okay, so here's Co-op Power. We think it's really important to point out that our, by the way, I think if you go to view, you can actually go to full screen there and get rid of that bar on the top. There you go. And yeah, full screen mode is down there. Okay, see, much better. Yeah, you know, and this is just kind of tying in a little bit to what Jim was talking about earlier when we think about why are we here, or why is it important that we're talking about climate change. For Co-op Power, one way that we answer that question is that the people who are harmed and damaged the most by climate change tend to be people who don't have a lot of resources to start out with, whether that means that you live near a coal plant or in marginal land, or if you just don't have the baseline amount of resources to respond to things that change. So people who take the most harm from the way that we're currently producing energy also tend to have the least say in how they themselves get energy. And we think that's crazy. And so that's a big part of why we exist, is to give people who don't have a lot of resources options for owning their own renewable energy assets. And yes, you can go to the next slide. Like I said, we started out in Franklin County there, and since then we've started 5 other community energy co-ops, going into New York now as well. Each one of these is centered around a community of people that decided they wanted to own their own renewable energy projects. I'll point out here that when we think about the demographics of, actually, I'll just take a step back. I think we go to the next slide, we can say so that's us. We don't need to dwell on that too long. They weren't able to be here with us today, but so here are the principles that we believe are important when we're thinking about what to offer people so far as solar goes. Kimberly already talked a lot about that, and you all can read, so that's what we're focusing on. I would like to emphasize the community-led planning, cooperative ownership, and local control in the lower left-hand corner there. So we really believe that when you give somebody an option, and when we're talking about renewable energy here, that it is important that ownership be an option. And so we were discussing already, the alternatives that are available. There's a lot of community shared solar offerings that don't provide ownership, but we'll go into why we think ownership is important shortly. This is our first installation. It's in Brattleboro, Vermont. You can see we built it with a food cooperative. And go to the next slide. Actually, could we skip ahead a couple slides there? Yeah, one more. Okay, so I apologize for the quality of the picture. I really want to just illustrate, and I should have put this earlier in the presentation, what is community shared solar, or what is a community ownership of renewable assets mean in this context? The basic idea is that we'll take a central location, that could be the roofs of large buildings. One of the projects that we're working on now is an interfaith community solar project in Boston. So to run you through that, the concept is that we'll find a community of people based in a house of worship or another nonprofit with a large roof. We build panels, or we work with installers to build panels on the roof of that house of worship, and then use virtual net metering to take the energy that's produced, that goes back to the grid. As you can see, the virtual net metering piece of it just means that if you have a utility account, we can credit the power that's produced on that roof to your account. So this gives people who don't have high incomes, people who may be renters, or just people who don't have roofs that are suitable for solar, an option to buy part of a shared solar project and to receive the benefits from that. And I think we can point out here, in case I haven't made it clear enough, that by and large, I remember the statistic from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory being that about 50% of homes or buildings in the United States, from a sunlight standpoint, are suitable for hosting solar panels. I think once you start looking at the age of the roof and some other factors, it gets a lot closer to about 1 in 5. So this is solar for the other 80%. Specifically people who don't own their own homes. Okay, now if we go back a couple slides, just to make sure we're clear. Okay, so here's the deal. We've already talked about a lot of this, but the way the game is set up right now does not really favor people who don't already have a lot of assets. Okay, and so part of how that works is the federal tax credit. To capture that tax credit that Andrew was talking about, you need to have enough taxable income that you're going to be able to absorb, $9,000 to $10,000 in taxes which not everybody can do. A lot of securities issues, and if you want to invest in a venture together, there's a lot of laws that will prevent you from doing that, and more importantly, to prevent you from being exploited by people who are saying, you know, here's a new company, a new LLC that I started last night, and we're going to go drill for some oil, and we'd like you to give us $1,000. So the laws are there to help as well. They also make it difficult to own community energy assets. Okay, so that's kind of the lay of the landscape. So if we go to the next slide here. We came up with, over 3 years, ways to overcome a lot of that. It's all kind of complicated, and if you're interested in the mechanics of it, we can talk about it in detail afterwards. The essence of it is that we've come up with a way for communities of mixed incomes, mixed backgrounds, mixed classes to all participate in a project together. The basic concept is that you can choose how much you want to pay and choose how much power you want to receive. In the context of the church project, if there's one wealthy individual in the congregation who wants to put in a lot more money, that can finance the majority of the project. And then the output from the panels made by that donor can be credited to the accounts of all the other congregants in the church. That's the basic idea. So I think we're about done with my piece of it. Just make sure I'm not leaving anything out. I'll go through the other slides here.
So Ben, did you say there's 2 different models or 3 different models?
Yeah, so we actually have three different models. The first model is 100% community financed. And that's where all the people who want to participate in the project make prepayments for the power they'll receive from the panels. We use those prepayments to build the project. Second model is, and actually you can kind of see it here, well, this one's cooperatively owned. And actually we skipped over that part of it. So the second model is that we work with a third-party investor and a bank to provide debt, and so that the system is owned by a third party, and we can provide power to people on a month-to-month basis, so similar to a power purchase agreement. The last model is that well, it's essentially the same as community ownership. The only difference is that rather than making prepayments that are directly correlated to how much power people receive, you can make a prepayment of whatever size you want and choose how much power you receive. So that gives us flexibility to have several people pay for most of the project and then allow the rest of the people in the project to be subscribers to pay on a monthly basis, rather than requiring a high upfront investment for everybody. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, yeah?
If I invested in something like that, how am I getting my money back?
Yeah, so it all depends on, it all really depends on how you choose to participate in the project. If you choose to make an upfront prepayment, typically you'll see savings in the range of 30 to 50% over the lifetime of the project.
How do I get my money back? Am I getting a check from this cooperative, or am I getting credits from the electric company?
Credits from the electric company.
So how do they know? So every investor is registered with the electric company?
Yeah, you already are. It's your utility account.
No, but every investor, my electric company is going to know that I invested in this project, and somehow the calculations are going to be made, and it's going to be reflected in my bill.
That's right. So you'll pay for a certain amount of capacity, and we call it 2 kilowatts, right, of capacity on, and it could be in a roof, as the example I described. It could be in a field somewhere. That is going to produce a certain amount of kilowatt hours every month, and then that will turn into a credit that you'll see a new line item on your bill that will be credited to your bill every month. Yeah.
So there was a proposal that if you put solar on your roof, given all the credits, that you would pay monthly for the financing a little bit less than you paid for your electricity. And I get kind of how she got there. With this kind of a plan, is that a reasonable expectation, or are you also going to have to buy land? Or, so you see what I'm saying? I'm trying to figure out how does it work? Because NRG tried to get me to buy into a solar farm, and the numbers just didn't make sense to me in terms of savings. It made sense for me in terms of them making a lot of money, but I didn't see how I was saving a lot of money.
Right, you know, and I think hopefully without oversimplifying things here, it's that if NRG is going to put up the upfront capital to invest in building the project, they're going to get more of the revenue and the profit that comes out of the project.
But is that number, my utility bill, is that what I would expect to invest in this kind of a plan?
Right, so if you're able, I would say the hierarchy of ways to participate in solar, if you have money to make an upfront investment, far and away the best thing you can do is own panels on your own roof, right? And okay, if you can't, the next best thing you can do is to make a prepayment so that you can own panels in a cooperatively owned system, okay? And as we've modeled it, it's the situation in Massachusetts right now is a little bit on the rocks, but as we modeled it, by making a prepayment, you can save 30 to 50% on your monthly power bills. And again, because you're putting more of that money in up front, we're able to bring more of that money back to you because you're a member of the cooperative. After that, if you're not able to make a prepayment, you don't have the money for it, then you want to start looking into things like leasing and power purchasing agreements, where I would expect you could get probably 10 to 15% savings month to month. Does that answer your question?
I think it does, yeah. And Dennis, is something like this being planned here?
Not yet?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's part of why we brought people here, is because we would like to look into the possibility. They have done it in Harvard successfully, and they're growing. And you can do it in a large area. It doesn't have to be in Acton. It has to be a load zone for the, a new two words. And some of these other people can describe it better than I can, but there are areas within Massachusetts that are called load zones for our electricity providers. And the towns that are within those load zones can share a community garden, solar garden of electricity that comes out of that. So we could place our panels in another town and still could participate in the electricity that comes out of that.
Yeah, and so we'd be very interested to have like I said, our interfaith project is open now, so any houses of worship that are interested in participating, we'd love to speak with, and to basically get into the project. We're aiming to do 20 at once, and then distribute that to each of the communities. But, you know, at the very least, we could also just provide you a lay of the land and give you a sense of what's going on.
If Green Acton is able to help or find out about a community solar system in our load zone, if people want to find out about it, if they want to put their name and their email address on our sign-up sheet and check the little column that says, you know, tell me about community solar, we'll keep you up to date on anything that emerges in our load zone.
So Ben, what does it take for a group of citizens to start a community solar program?
Yeah, okay, so actually for that, it helps me to organize how I present this because I'm trying to make sure that I'm speaking to you and not to, my projection of a bunch of solar experts or a bunch of installers or whatever you might be. But we can go back a couple slides and I think I can point out, we go back a little farther. Okay, so here are the real major challenges that are associated. You know, if you're a group of people and you all want to have a shared community solar project, these are the issues that you're going to have to address. To be more specific, I think one of the most difficult things is that the most direct way to finance a project from a community of people is to have everyone invest equity in the project, right? So we've each got $1,000 and we all want to put it into the project. Unfortunately, not that simple. To be able to do that, to make that possible, the entity that owns the project would have to come up with disclosure documents and provide that to all of you. And that comes with a very high cost. We're talking lawyer fees. So the upfront cost of just coming up with the disclosure documents, forming the legal entity, informing all the potential investors who are non-accredited investors of the project, making sure that you understand the risk of the project, and then we're not committing securities fraud, is pretty steep. And so that's one hurdle that you're going to have to overcome if you want to just come up with it yourself. And if you look at the Harvard Solar Garden project, I think ultimately their installed cost per watt ended up being like $6 or $6 to $8. I'm trying to remember exactly how much. $7 per watt. Okay, and what that means is that's very high. I think at the time, market-wise, you'd really be looking more for, for 50 watts. So,
right, but was that? Are you saying that was high because of all of the sort of transaction costs, all the legal costs, all of the work that they had to do to organize themselves and take advantage of the incentives that are available?
That's right.
Okay, so
that's right.
It wasn't just the cost of the installation was maybe what, half of it, and the rest of it, all the administrative and legal cost was the rest. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think this is a helpful moment to point out something that in the industry we call soft costs. So one of the key goals of the Sunshine Initiative that they're talking about at the federal level is to reduce soft costs of solar projects. Soft costs with community shared solar are much higher than they are with a rooftop project because you need to get 20 churches or something to agree to put panels on their roof rather than just one household. So, one thing that co-op power can bring is because we've got a legal structure that allows us to offer a kind of plug-and-play option, our soft costs are going to be much, much lower than if you wanted to create the entire apparatus yourself.
So if there was 20 people, I pick a number, I don't know if it needs to be 20, 50, in the town of Acton that were interested in a community solar program, and we formed ourselves a little group, I don't know what we call it, Acton Co-op Power. Would we go to you, you would help us, LLC, and you would help us understand and figure out what we needed to do and help us work through the process of developing a community solar project?
Yeah, we have, we separate projects down into 3 different phases, 3 basic phases. First being pre-development, development, and post-development. So we can work with you on the pre-development phase, which is to look at the feasibility of it, to make sure that you have consensus around the project, to make sure that you modeled the project, the economics of it correctly, so to make sure, you can do that. So different parts of it, we can come in and enter in to get to a point of what we'd say is like a starting line of, yes, the project can happen, yes, there are enough off-takers, there's consensus, people want it to happen. So that would be the first step. And at the end of that, we would start a LLC that would own the solar assets of the project. So then the development phase is everything that goes along with site development, permitting, getting interconnection. So going through that entire process of development and making sure that all of the subscribers, all the off-takers are in a position where they're ready actually to sign contracts to purchase the net metering credits. And then we build the project based on that. So finance and build the project. And then lastly, post-development is just construction management, asset management, billing, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, just a comment. I helped with the Harvard Solar Garden. I was deeply involved for a while. Don't do it on your own.
What do you mean don't do it?
Work with somebody like
Power. Yeah, sure.
It's a daunting task.
Yeah.
And basically, there's one individual in Harvard who, God bless him, made it happen, but there were
full-time job.
Innumerable barriers, full-time job.
But they were also pioneers, as I understand
They were
it,
pioneers.
and they had the arrows in the back to prove it.
They do, and these are the issues, and access to capital is another one. So if Co-op Power is capable of doing this, great. There are other models out there for subscribers, as was described, but I think this is a fantastic.
Again, this is the option for people that cannot or choose not to put it on their roofs, right?
Yeah, as the speaker said, if you put it on your roof,
Physically.
it's the best way to get your money back fastest. But if you can't, there are other options, and there's a group of people who want to band together and work with somebody like Co-op Power. Much easier than trying to do it on your own.
Question about the ownership model in the co-op structure. How do you deal with transfers of ownership later on, or somebody moves out of the community? Can those be, that ownership stake be transferred and sold subsequently?
Yeah, there's 2 ways that we deal with that. The most basic way is, so the answer to your question is yes. The ownership share can be sold.
Okay.
Now, that turns into a significant problem, and I'm not sure how interesting this is to many of you, but if you want to finance a project like this, you need to have assurance you need to be able to assure your lender or the people who's providing the money that you're going to have enough people with purchase power to ensure that the project is profitable, has revenue. So if people are potentially going to leave, how do you address that? And the two ways that we address that are, first, we found that demand for community shared solar project shares by far outstrips supply. So for every one person that leaves, we're confident that we can find 10 people who are going to want to be in line to replace that person. Secondly, we work with anchor tenants. So we have, we call it 30% of the output of the project actually goes to the house of worship or to the nonprofit that hosts it. And that entity can absorb additional capacity. All right, yeah, go ahead.
I'm here actually as a resident, interested for myself. However, I'm on the board of trustees of a house of worship with a big roof, lots of sun. So if you were talking about some operation where you're trying to put churches together to do something, so an individual house of worship could, I don't know what the barriers are to just doing it themselves like a private owner to get down their own electricity bill. So is that an option, or are there barriers that you all know about for a non-tax-paying resident?
Yeah, well, you remember the slide that Andrew had that showed basically the total value of where the revenue was coming in from for a solar panel, and about, I think if I remember right, Andrew, it was about 30%, a little less, maybe a quarter.
From tax credits.
The value came to the tax credit, and if you don't pay taxes, you have no way of paying the tax credit.
Right.
Now, if
that's where you get into the option of working with a third party that finances it for you, and they can take advantage of the tax credits and offer you a long-term PPA.
Okay.
Right.
So there's that option,
Right.
which I really appreciate your clarifying, or joining up with a bunch of churches looking to do the same thing, and we would do that through you.
That's right.
All right, so I have two directions to go. Thank
And
you.
under our model, and I will point out, this kind of answers your question, that one of the other barriers is that if you can't have people actually be equity owners in a project, if the barriers to that are too great, and people are just subscribers, how do you capture that tax credit? The way that other community shared solar developers approach it is they have a third-party owner who gets all of the value of the tax credit and all of the value of the accelerated depreciation that Andrew was talking about. What we've made possible is for the value of the tax credit to be distributed back to the subscribers of the project. So anyone who pays up front for this, for an ownership share in the project gets the value of that tax credit back. And that's part of what allows us to provide a much better deal so far as community solar is concerned than anyone who's providing a third-party ownership-based model.
So going back to this house of worship model, which I think is very interesting, basically you're talking about certain individuals within that religious community taking advantage of what is probably a large roof space, large open roof space without a lot of trees around it. That special interest group, if you will, can participate in sharing the cost and the benefits of a solar project, right?
Yeah, that's
and so an individual house of worship can do that. You don't need to have multiple houses of worship working together. A group within that house of worship can take advantage of that real estate situation, if you will, that large roof situation, to do what we're talking about in terms of community solar.
This is what I think is one really exciting part about being able to work with community shared solar, and house of worship specifically. Of the roughly 15 houses of worship we've talked with so far, some of them are filled with people who would genuinely really benefit from getting a $50 credit each month on their utility bills. It would be a significant increase in their disposable income. Some of the other houses of worship that we've been speaking with have boards of trustees and have endowments, and so don't have an immediate economic need to be able to provide cost savings to people. So to answer your question, what the structure of having 20 houses of worship together allows us to do is that if you're in a community, call it in Cambridge, and you put panels on your roof, you're in the same load zone, and you can provide net metering credits, virtual net metering credits, to congregants in churches in Dorchester and Mattapan, south of the river. And basically through partnerships that they already have with those churches, we're able to directly use existing relationships to make that possible. So that's just something I think is exciting.
It is.
Dennis, I was wondering if, given the time, if we should experiment with opening this up to any more general questions.
Great idea. I think we pretty much have an open forum, but yeah, we only have 10 minutes left. We didn't want to try to keep to the time. We obviously have an obligation here to clear out. But I think these individuals, we do have the space till 10 o'clock. But I think, in terms of the formal program, we're going to end at 9. If people want to talk individually with the speakers, they're welcome to. But anyhow, at this point, we do have 10 more minutes. So are there any other questions for anybody here?
Sorry, I just had one last thing I wanted to say.
Sure,
So I kind of went into the questions right away, but the last thing I wanted to say is it just ties into another point that Jim made earlier, which is that we think about climate change in these very negative terms. It's a scary thing. We're all worried about it. Changing over to renewable energy, coming up with new ways to use renewable energy is the most exciting opportunity of certainly my lifetime. And I encourage you to think about this and come out of this tonight. Thinking about it, if you had gotten into computing, personal computing in 1992, or if you had started to get into the automobile in around 1920, that's where we are right now with renewable energy. So yes, climate change is scary, but it's something we can overcome, and you're at a really, really exciting time to be alive and to be participating right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So a few hands up. Sir, yes.
So I've been doing some research, and I've actually reached out to some companies to get quotes for residential solar for my house, and the average cost per watt varied greatly, but it was the cheapest cost per watt I found on reaching around was looking around was about $4.10 a watt here in Massachusetts, and I've read that the national average is closer to $3 a watt. And is there a reason that Massachusetts is so expensive? Is it because the installers know that we have the SREC program? So
I'm gonna take a little bit of a cut at that.
Okay.
And I'm sure this gentleman can help us maybe even more than that. But one thing that does affect the cost of solar installations in different states is the regulations, and whether you need to have a licensed electrician install it or not. And every state has different regulations, and that can tend to differentiate. And then you also have just the cost of labor, right? Cost of living is higher, cost of salaries are higher in Massachusetts than in other states. So I think those two things contribute. But does anybody else want to answer that question?
So I think you nailed it. It tends to be higher labor costs. The soft costs in Massachusetts are relatively high because building permit costs are high and building standards are high, and the National Electrical Code drives us to use specific equipment that adds more cost than in some other states.
Yeah, Florida, we've got quotes on our platform about $2.50 a watt, and there's other areas in the South that have similar lower cost structures, same reasons. It's kind of systemic. That said, you also have to look at what the equipment is being offered and what you're paying for that amount per watt. If you have 20-year warranties associated with the labor as well as the system components, are they really high efficiency panels? There's a lot of different things that could make that vary by place.
So I actually misspoke. The lowest quote I got was $3.90 a watt. Is that a reasonable price to pay for residential solar?
I will refer you to our data report that comes out in a few weeks, because we'll have much more specifics there. But it's not outside the range of possibilities. We see those kinds of quotes and messages all the time.
Okay. Yeah, I would just echo that and say we posted some data recently from Mass alone, and we're seeing costs between 320 a watt and 550 a watt. There's a huge range out there. Some of that has to do with the particular panels that people are choosing, the particular converters. Some of it is that people aren't getting multiple bids. Some of it is that people don't realize that these prices are negotiable as well. This is something that costs about as much as a car. So if you get someone you like and they're offering you a price that may be higher than someone else, it pays to ask them, hey, can you help me out on this?
So I will add to that, and I'm happy to chat if you like. Installation practices and warranties also drive cost. So you can see solar panel installations in Acton where you can't see any conduit, any inverters on the outside of the roof. Maybe the panels are all black and uniform in color with black rail, and then you'll see others where those practices are different. You see conduit running across the top of the roof or under the roof. You see equipment on the outside. Maybe the panel frames are silver. So it, the dollar per watt metric doesn't tell you everything. Doesn't tell you what the installer's warranties are and whether there's a performance warranty. So it's a simple yardstick to latch onto, but a platform like Energy Sage can help you measure apples to apples. Some of this is going to depend on what you personally like and who you trust and who you want to work with.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ma'am, you're back.
Regarding the net metering, I've heard it mentioned that it's possible, maybe likely, that the electric companies will credit back not the retail price, but something less than that in the longer run, because they won't be able to afford to keep the grid going.
Sure. So
they have to shell out all this money and give it back to the homeowners.
So there's a lot going on right now in the legislature. There's actually two competing bills, one from the Senate and one from the House, and they're trying to hash out the details of what that credit value rate's going to be. As we mentioned before, we're really talking for large commercial systems about changing from what's currently that retail rate net metering to something else. So if you have a system on your roof and it's below the particular thresholds that are applicable, you'll still get that retail rate net metering. As the gentleman mentioned, that's part of kind of the legislative foundation for what we have in Massachusetts.
So will that be grandfathered in then to a system if I'm getting it this year or next year?
So for a residential scale system, that's the current law, and it will, for the foreseeable future, from everything that I can see, continue to be the law.
But it's not guaranteed?
It's not guaranteed, no.
And if I could just add on to that, when you talk about the possibility of the utilities not being able to afford to continue paying net metering credits, that's not an accurate possibility. So that's not a reflection of the reality of the situation. These are investor-owned utilities, so their primary fiduciary responsibility is to the shareholders who own them. And there's a bottom line that they are trying to protect. So their business model right now is based on having very extensive infrastructure networks to be able to provide power, keep baseload power, provide it to you whenever you want. And by having distributed energy like solar, it creates a much cheaper alternative for homeowners and hopefully we think for non-homeowners to be able to make their own power and not have to continue buying it from utilities. So when you see a utility fighting net metering credits, you see them focusing on really trying to take out a competing business model. By having net metering credits, it's one way that we can think about increasing pressure on utilities just to change their business model. Rather than fighting competition, little guys, homeowners, who want to be able to provide their own power, they should be changing their model. So that's all I would add to that.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What does this do to your insurance policy and your mortgage?
Well, anyone answer that question?
Yeah, so the insurance carrier that you have will be able to tell you if the premium that you're paying for your current insurance would increase or not. And so you would just let them know that you installed solar, and I've heard both ways where some companies won't charge an extra premium and some will. And so it can vary, but it doesn't affect your mortgage. It affects your the value of your real estate, depending if you own your system or if you lease. If you lease or go into a PPA, there's no increase in home value, but there are studies that show that if you own your system, then there is a value increase. But it doesn't affect your mortgage.
But then there's also no increase in your property taxes, which is
Yes, yeah, not in the state of Massachusetts.
For 20 years.
Yeah.
So it doesn't increase your property taxes?
Then it's not allowed to.
Okay.
There's also no sales tax.
I just have a question about some cities have some municipal power companies or local power companies. How does it affect even if they when a purchase?
Yeah, so we have over 40, maybe up to 50 municipal lead plants in Massachusetts. They all have their own rules for net metering. So if you're in a municipal lead plant territory, that's something you need to kind of investigate the specifics of the rules.
So Boxborough, Stowe, and maybe
Concord, Littleton.
and Concord, Littleton. There's a lot of surrounding towns, just right around Acton, that are municipal utilities, and they don't have to abide by the same net metering rules that the investor-owned utilities like EverSource and National Grid do. But you can still get solar renewable energy credits, SRECs, from the electricity that you generate from a solar system, solar panel system in a home in one of those municipalities. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How does EverSource react to this assault?
Well, that's a good question. Number one, they're obligated by the regulations in the state to sort of cooperate as a residential homeowner. If you want to put solar on the roof, there's nothing they can do to stop that. So I would I'd like to hear other people, but I would say they give you maybe begrudging support. I mean, they're not going to be like, if your power goes out, just the way they cooperate with you, and they're overwhelmed too by the amount of solar that's being installed, and they have to, but they're obligated, and so they're going to cooperate with you all at the end of the day. You have more experience than I do.
Yeah, EverSource is sort of turned the corner. It used to be that National Grid was more responsive to solar, residential solar than EverSource. Recently, we're seeing faster approvals from EverSource for residential solar systems than we are from National Grid and many of the municipal plants. So they get it. They're okay with it. But the guys, the people who are doing the work that have to make your system work for you are fine with it. The linemen don't care. So if your power goes out, they're not going to go down the street and say, you have solar, you don't get no electricity. They don't do that. You'll be fine.
Yes, sir.
Quick question. So, is there a limit on how much installed capacity you can have on your roof? And do the credits depend on how much capacity you have installed as compared to your consumption?
Yeah, so the utility company, they're friendly to solar for the most part, right? But they're not in the business to pay you extra for any overproduction, and they probably won't even interconnect you to their grid if you're overproducing. And so up to about like 20% above, and it depends on if you are, sizing your system for future usage or not. But in general, it would be very tough to, let's say your house uses 5,000 kilowatt hours and you want to produce 7,000 kilowatt hours a year. It's going to be really tough to have them approve that and interconnect you. So it also doesn't make sense too, because you're paying a lot more for that and you're not necessarily using the power that's generated. And so it's best to, size your system appropriately. That's why installers will look at your last 12 months of consumption and they'll size it appropriately.
I'm sorry, but I thought you said earlier that if you have excess, you could sell it to your neighbors.
So
You can give it to them.
No, you can sell it to them.
Yeah, so Massachusetts is somewhat unique in that we don't have any restrictions on sizing the system to load that are in our regulations or law. So you can have almost no load at your site and build the largest system that you can feasibly put out there, generate those extra credits, and then distribute them as you see fit. One of the things that we highly recommend that you think about if you are going to oversize your system, specifically what you're going to use those credits for, because you've made a capital investment to get those, so it needs to enter into the economics of the system.
So you won't get credit directly from that excess electricity, but you can
So-
sell it to your neighbor?
So what will happen is if your system's oversized to your load, you'll just keep building up a credit balance, and month after month after month, you'll pay $0 for your electricity bill, and that balance will grow. So at some point, yeah, it doesn't make sense to have a system of that size. So what we hear a lot when we're reviewing applications, we ask people, hey, we've noticed that the system's much significantly oversized, and what we'll hear is people are thinking about transferring to electric heat with heat pumps, or people are looking to get an electric car down the road. So those are the sorts of plans people are making.